Hey y'all, I'm Karen Mayer Cunningham, the special education boss. If you've ever felt confused, overwhelmed, or just plain frustrated at the 504 IEP table, you are in the right place. Every week, I'm breaking down the rules, the rights, and the realities of special education so you can walk into meetings informed, empowered, and ready to make real change. And whether you're a parent, a teacher, an advocate, a school-based member, or somebody who's just trying to do right by a student, this podcast gives you straight talk, real answers, and tools that you can use immediately. I'm not here to play politics. I'm not here to play sides. I'm here to train people who sit at the table and teach you how to follow the law, ask the right questions, and protect the rights of students. So go ahead and hit subscribe, share this with a friend, and you know what? Meet me back here every single week. We're not just talking about change. We're making it. Because when you know better, you do better. And when we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody. Hey, you guys, welcome to our webinar. If we haven't met, I'm Karen Mayer Cunningham, Special Education Boss, training everyone that sits at the 504 IEP table to navigate and negotiate successful student outcomes. Tonight's training is going to be so important for all of you that have a child with a disability, and it's very important that you know this information, you apply it right. We are going to be talking about how to file an effective OCR complaint. And so if you don't know what that is, it is the Office of Civil Rights, the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. And I'm sure you've heard me talk in other forums about, I would file a state complaint, I would file a federal complaint, I would file an OCR complaint. And sometimes that seems a little daunting, and because it's something that I do in my space all the time and train people, I wanted to bring this to y'all because it's important that we know what it doesn't do and how it may be helpful for your child that has a disability. And so I just want to start out with some disclaimers. I am not an attorney. I'm not ever going to be an attorney. God bless attorneys. And I'm not giving you legal advice. This information is you can find this directly on the Office of Civil Rights page, which you can find at ed.gov, ed.gov. I'm just going to go through some sections of it. We're going to literally walk through a filing. At any given point, I probably have over 100 civil rights complaints open. I've been using them for about 9 years now, and I've found such gains that I didn't really know about or know how to access them correctly. And so I want to share a little bit of the knowledge that I've learned over the years. I've learned from lots of wonderful mentors, lots of amazing investigators at the Office of Civil Rights, and how it may be useful for you with your child with a disability. So talking about what is the Office of Civil Rights. The Office of Civil Rights is a federal rights protection law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, disability, and age in the programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance from the U.S. Department of Education. Discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin is prohibited. Additionally, discrimination on the basis of disability is prohibited by Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and then Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And so I'm not going to read the whole introduction. You can find that on their website. But for purposes of tonight, we're going to talk about the most common civil rights complaints that I file, and that is around discrimination based on disability. So let's talk about who is protected in this entity. These civil rights laws are enforced by the Office of Civil Rights, extended to all state agencies, elementary and secondary school systems, colleges, universities, vocational schools, proprietary schools, state vocational recreational rehabilitation agencies, libraries, and museums that receive the U.S. Department of Education funds. So again, the main categories are going to be race, color, national origin discrimination, sex discrimination, disability discrimination, age discrimination, Boy Scouts of America, equal access discrimination, and retaliation. But for purposes of tonight, we're going to focus on disability. Now, when you go to their website and you read, the Office of Civil Rights will protect your child from being discriminated based on disability, it can seem very exciting. And for those of us that have had children that were in public schools or public entity that receive federal funds and had an identified disability, it seems and sounds like this great catch-all. And it is a wonderful federal entity, but it's not a catch-all. And part of what I want to share with you tonight is that I love parents. I serve parents. I love teachers. I love administrators. I love school based members. I love therapists, everybody that's involved in this space. But I find that when I get a client or I'm talking to clients who are going to file, they're just going to file, they're going to file, they don't know how to do it effectively. And so, because it's your civil right, there's still a process, right? There's a procedural process, right? So that you get the wanted outcome, the expected outcome for your child. And so I want to show you some things and walk you through some things that I've learned the hard way. So hopefully you won't have these missteps when you're talking about your kiddo with a disability. And so who are these children when we're talking about I'm going to file an Office of Civil Rights complaint? So those are children that either have a 504 or they have an IEP. Now, while we talked earlier, the Office of Civil Rights governs what? The Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the 504, and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. What I didn't say was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Okay. And so there are 13 federal entities in our government that oversee education. I won't go over them now, but while they're alike, they're different. Okay. And so there are components that you could file a discrimination disability complaint for the OCR when a child has an IEP. There's certain components, not the totality of it. And then, of course, certain components of a 504. So first, your child has to have an identified disability if we're going to file a discrimination complaint. I want you to know that probably the biggest thing to understand about the Office of Civil Rights is it's going to take time. It is a federal entity. Only probably 10 years ago, I can't remember how long ago, they had over 2,600 investigators nationally, which isn't a lot when you talk about all the states that we have. Now we are down to only just barely over 500. And most of them are taking care of my complaints in the great state where I live and states that I serve. So I want to make sure that you use this process effectively and know what they cover and what they don't cover so that you're not frustrated, right? First of all, who can file a discrimination complaint? Anyone who believes that an educational institution that receives federal assistance has discriminated against a student based on disability may file a complaint. The person or organization filing the complaint need not be the victim of the alleged discrimination, but may complain on behalf of another person or a group. Timelines. A complaint must be filed within 180 calendar days of the date of the alleged discrimination, unless the time for the filing is extended by OCR granting a waiver. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Institutional grievance procedures. Prior to filing a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights against an institution, a potential complainant may want to find out about the institution's grievance process and use that process to have the complaint resolved. However, a complainant is not required by law to use the institutional grievance process before filing a complaint with OCR. So really quickly, let's talk about your 6 dispute resolution options, and then we'll end with OCR. We talk about these a lot. We have trainings on Special Education Academy. We have them on YouTube. But very quickly, they are a district grievance, a state written complaint, a mediation, a due process hearing, a dispute resolution session, or a federal complaint with U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. And let's talk about how we file the complaint, because how you file the complaint is going to be almost everything in getting it right. One of the things I want you to remember is this is not something you can change your mind on. This is not like you're going to call Alicia on the phone and go, listen, I don't want a hamburger. I want chicken instead. Once you've filed it, it's done. It's not going to be amended. It's not like you can just change your mind. You don't get on the phone with them and go, I want to add this and this. Be very purposeful when you are filing that you include all of your allegations and your areas of need or concern that you're wanting the federal government to consider opening an investigation. You're wanting the federal government to consider opening an investigation. So what needs to be on there? So the Office of Civil Rights has a fillable PDF that you could print out. It's about 11 pages long. And then they have an online version. We're going to walk through the online version, but should you choose to use the fillable PDF, and you don't have to use that, you could just use your own paper if you wanted to do that. But here are the components: the complainant's name, address, and if possible, although not required, a telephone number where the complainant may be reached during business hours. information about the person or persons or date or class of persons injured by the alleged discrimination, names of the injured person, but they're not required, the name and location and the institution that committed the alleged discrimination acts, and a description of the alleged discriminatory act in a sufficient detail to enable the OCR to understand what occurred, when it occurred, and the basis for the alleged discrimination. And so we're going to pack that for a little bit and kind of talk about what I would recommend as you're filling this out. And again, I'm not an attorney, I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm not even giving you advice. I'm just giving you information that might be helpful to write an efficient and effective OCR complaint. So first, there are 7 steps on the online form. And so we're going to walk through that. First one, who was subjected to the discrimination? Who was subjected to discrimination? A great hearing officer told me one time, there are a lot of things that are wrong that aren't illegal. You should probably write that down. There are a lot of things that are wrong that are not illegal. So we're talking about, we are making an allegation that somebody has violated a US citizen's civil rights that receives an education from an institution that receives federal funds. Okay. So let's check all the boxes that apply, and you need to check at least one. So it says, I'm thinking about filing a complaint. I love that it says that. I'm thinking about filing a complaint on behalf of myself, my minor child, a person for who I am the guardian, an other individual or a group. So you could file an OCR complaint on yourself if you believe that there was a violation under any of the choices that they have. But if you were a person that had a disability and you were in college, you could file an OCR complaint on yourself because you would be over the age of 18. My minor child. So that is a minor child applies whenever legal guardianship is established. So if I want to file on behalf of my minor child, I can do that. Next, a person for who I am the guardian. So if you have been awarded guardianship in your state for an individual that receives special education or 504 services, that would be the category. And the last category is what I'm going to file on as an advocate. So the last box is other individual or group. Other individual or group. So this is the box that I check. So if it's an other individual, I'm going to be filing on behalf of the student I advocate for. I would put, when I get to that page, a student that I advocate for. I also check that box for a group. Now, why would I be filing on behalf of a group? Because I file complaints on inaccessible grounds, schools, doors, bathrooms, sinks, soap, and playgrounds at public schools. And so those have to be accessible. So when I'm filing for that, it's just on behalf of a group of people. And for that, I'm not going to need as much specificity as I'm going to need for a child with a disability. So if you have questions around that at the end, certainly ask them and I'll tease that out. So again, me, my minor child, a person for who I am the guardian, another individual or group. Okay. Note, to proceed with an investigation of an individual, OCR will need the signed consent of the person about who the complaint is being filed upon, a parent or legal guardian. At the end of the complaint filing process, be sure to print out the consent form, sign it, and mail it to the appropriate OCR office. So what are appropriate OCR offices? There are many. There are 12 OCR offices, and I just want to really quickly run through them. They are grouped by states. So one houses Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Vermont. One houses New Jersey, New York, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Next, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. Next, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee. Mine, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. 6, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Washington, D.C. Next, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and North Dakota. Next, Michigan and Ohio. Next, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Next office, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming. California, they get their own office. Next, Alaska, Hawaii, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, America, Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, and Montana. And then, of course, there's the national headquarters in Maryland and Washington, D.C. Okay. So when you file this, an online application, it will automatically go to the right office. If you're going to mail it in, make sure that you mail it in to the location that is your Department of Education Office of Civil Rights location. Okay. Who was subjected to the discrimination? We've determined that. So what that means is if I'm going to file on behalf of my client Cindy on her little girl Sally, I'm going to file the complaint. Once I submit it, I'm going to send the mom the consent form, which I need her to fill out, which will have her name, the student's name, and the date and her signature. Without that being received within 20 days of me submitting the online complaint or mailing in the complaint, OCR will dismiss it. They will dismiss it. Usually they're kind enough to call and go, Karen, they don't call and they email and go, hey, we're looking for Cindy's consent form. And so as an advocate, what I do and what I train people to do, it's since I am the complainant, the parent is not the complainant, I'm filing the complaint, is that I will have that parent email me the consent form and then I will send it to OCR. Okay. That way, as the advocate, I have a copy of it because things get lost in the internet. And then I have a timeline that, yes, we did email this to you on 11/29/2023. We don't ever want to delay anything. And so if they don't have the consent form, and I know people get busy, they're going to kick it out. They will not look at it, they will not consider it, and they will not evaluate it to consideration to open the investigation. Okay. Number 2 on the online submission form, the OCR complaint assessment system. Number 2, what was discrimination based on? What was discrimination based on? And again, remember, here are your choices. And it says, I'm thinking about filing complaint on discrimination based on one or more of the following. Now, I have checked up to 3 of these and have had them opened and have successfully won these complaints. And those are always discrimination. Number 2, race. And number 3, retaliation. We'll walk through what those are. So for purposes of today, we'll talk about disability. The other choices, again, are race, color, national origin, ethnicity, ancestry, sex, age, disability, violation of the Boy Scout Act, retaliation. Here are the types of discrimination that we're going to be talking about tonight. Disability. A person with a disability is defined as a person who has a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities, has a record of such impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. So it didn't say if the school gave you a 504, didn't say if the school granted you an IEP. It says those 3 things. Let's read them again. It's a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities, or has a record of such an impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. Whether a person has a disability is determined without considering mitigating measures. For more information about disability discrimination, please see our website. Okay. Race, which I have had open, is when I can determine and confirm to the Office of Civil Rights that my client was discriminated against based on race. I'll give you an example of that. Years ago, I think it's the first big case that I won in a large school district that it was a Title I school district, and it had a lot of minority students at that district and a lot of parents and students that English was not their first language. And the parent was denied a meeting, and the parent was denied invitation to the meeting. The school signed for the parent, and for 3 years, the parent had been asking for an interpreter and was denied because she was Spanish speaking for 3 years. And so I became involved. And so I filed discrimination based on race. And you have to be able to establish these facts. And so based on those years of her requesting that and them denying her an interpreter, they were found in violation of her civil rights based on race. Next is retaliation. And I want to be really clear on what retaliation is. Retaliation refers to actions taken for the purpose of interfering with any rights under the laws enforced by OCR, or because you made a complaint, testified, or participated in exerting your rights, right? So if you are at an IEP meeting or a 504 meeting and the school begins to behave in a way that's retaliatory, manipulative, controlling, all sorts of things that may happen, whether you have representation or not. That is could be causation for filing a complaint for retaliation because you invoked your rights or you brought representation to have your rights addressed. Okay? Number three on the OCR complaint assessment system will say the institution I'm thinking about complaining against is one, a public school or college, public school or college. Number two, private school or college who you believe receive federal funds. And so we talk about this a lot in on our trainings. Do private schools, do church schools, do homeschool co-ops? Do they have to comply with IDEA, ADA, Title II, 504? And that is based upon whether or not they receive educational federal funding. A public library, public vocational rehabilitation agency, private vocational rehabilitation organization who you believe receive federal funding. Okay, so those are your choices. OCR's jurisdiction is over institutions that receive federal financial assistance from the U.S. Department of Education. For claims of disability discrimination based on disability, OCR has jurisdiction over public education institutions and public libraries, regardless of whether these institutions receive federal financial assistance. If a complaint is filed against an institution OCR does not cover, for instance, private institutions not receiving federal assistance, OCR will not proceed further. Okay. Number four, when did the last discrimination occur? When did the last discrimination occur? This is what's so imperative about if you're considering filing a U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights complaint. The timeline, the window is very small. It's 180 days. So if I was going to file a complaint today, it would only go back to June 2nd, to June 2nd. So as I tell people in all of my trainings, I don't know what you're waiting for, right? So a lot of times parents, and I love parents, I was one of them, we're giving the school a little more time. We're just going to keep an eye on them. We're going to wait till the RTI is over or another grading period. But unlike state complaints, which in almost all states, I think except for 5, you have 2 years to file back. You have 180 days. That's a very short period of time. Okay. So it's going to say, did any of the acts that you're thinking about complaining about happen on or after June 2nd, 2022? So if I filed today, it's already calculated in the computer. You're really only going to be able to file and complain about something that happened in this fall semester. Okay. So remember that. Time limits. So there is a time limit. Again, if you want a waiver from the Office of Civil Rights, you can apply for that. I can just share with you, in the 500 years I've been doing this, I've never asked for, nor do I know anybody that's been granted a waiver. I'm sure people have. It's my understanding that you might be granted a waiver if, I don't know, if you were deployed, if there was a reason that you couldn't get the information to the Office of Civil Rights. I don't know what those extenuating circumstances are, but it even says on the OCR website, OCR will not grant and cannot grant you a waiver if the reason you didn't file your complaint is because you didn't know that you could. And so that's one of the reasons I'm training you guys, because I want you to know that you could and that you can. Okay. So the question is, do you think that you have reasons that would allow the OCR to grant a waiver of the time limits? And if you do, you would check that box, yes. Okay. Number 6, and this is so important. I know I am a mom and I get fired up about my kids and kids that I serve, and we can become very emotional, and we are just going to file. I have an amazing client. She's hysterical and she's very feisty, and I think she filed everywhere. She filed with OCR. I think she filed with the state. She filed the district grievance. She filed mediation. And I was able to get in there and go, whoa, you have to decide who you're going to file with. And that's your decision. They cover different entities, which hopefully we're to clear up a little bit tonight with OCR, what they do cover, what they don't cover, some areas. But different entities are not going to look at the same complaint. The state's not going to look at a complaint that the federal government's looking at, that the district's looking at. They're going to defer. Somebody is going to get to look at addressing it first. Otherwise, you would have conflicting agencies and entities. So should you choose to file with OCR, knowing what you know, if you think based on the area of need, this is your best way to go, then you do not file with another agency. The question is on number 6 of the complaint form, has the same matter been filed somewhere else? You need to say no because you didn't file it somewhere else. Did you file it with filed by you or someone else? Was it filed with another agency, such as a federal agency, a state agency, a city agency, a local agency, or in state or federal court? Did you file it with an institution itself using their internal grievance procedures? If you put yes, the system, the filing, the little electronic filing, which is kick you out. I'm sure it says have a nice day. I'm sure the state can take care of that for you, but they will not open them at the same time. Okay. If the same complaint allegations are currently being investigated by another agency, court, or institution, OCR will not open a case. Okay. That is important that you decide which one you're going to go with. So, as it relates to OCR, I think the thing that might be the most important for you to consider, while it's going to take longer when you file with OCR because it's a federal entity, your window is shorter, right? You only have this 180 days to file on. You can't just say, "Oh, I realized in January they didn't give my child their accommodations. I realized in January that there was a failure to implement because there was no speech and language pathologist. I just remembered that last Thanksgiving." No need to say that because they are not going to do that. What happened June 2nd? What happened June 2nd is all of us were on summer break, right? So that is really paramount when you're looking at your options and which way you're going to go. Okay. So next steps. So then it's going to give you a summary of what you've completed. You've completed the assessment questions. You're thinking about filing a complaint on behalf of somebody. You're thinking about filing a complaint based on discrimination. I'm thinking about complaining against a public school or college. Did any of the acts occur that you're thinking about occurring after June 2nd, 2023? Do you think that you have a reason that OCR would grant a waiver of time limit? And has this matter been filed somewhere else? And so if all those questions are correct, it will now say, fill out and submit an online complaint. You may now continue to submit the online complaint form. Okay. So let's talk about this. So nobody loves to talk more than me, right? And we're very passionate and we often want to tell people the story. And I'm the biggest storyteller there is. Legal entities do not want to know your passionate story. They want to know what legal violations that you're alleging may have occurred. And so I think the biggest mistake that I see for parents, guardians, anybody filing this, they just go on, whether it's a state complaint and they just write this novel of what happened. And while that's not untrue, it makes it very hard for that investigator to tease out what are the components and what are you alleging. And so over time, I've learned that my filings, while I'm fully prepped, and it's probably going to take me an hour or two to file an OCR complaint, is that my actual filing is quite lean. My actual filing is quite lean. And so we just did a training for your procedural rights and safeguards, which you can find on the academy. But what are the violations that you're alleging? So first thing you want to find out is you're going to want to find out, what does the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the 504 Act, what does it say? And of course, what does IDEA say? So when you're looking at filing for components of a 504, we're going to be filing on what? We're going to be filing on the accommodations. Your accommodations are a civil right. Your accommodations based on your disability are a civil right, whether you're in public school or you're employed. That's a benefit of being an American, right? So 504 simply says that a student cannot be discriminated and denied their accommodations based on their disability. That's their civil right. So when I'm in meetings, and I'm sure some of you have been in a meeting with me, I'm very clear with people that these are a violation of their civil rights. So when you didn't give him extended time, you violated his civil rights. When you didn't give him access to his VOCD, you violated his civil rights. When you didn't give him his frequent breaks because he has behavioral needs, you violated his civil rights. So while we're not training on how to build an IEP or a 504 document, I want you to know that in my training, I would say that I don't know that I've ever seen a 504 or an IEP that needed more than 10 accommodations, unless that student had multiple disabilities, was medically fragile, or was deaf, blind, visually impaired, or deaf and hard of hearing. And that's a training for another day. I really want you to look at your accommodations so that A, you can implement them as a provider and make sure that they're delivered to that student because that is their civil right. And I think if you lined up 100 teachers and said, do you think accommodations are optional? I think a lot of them would say they're optional, or they would say this, they would say as needed. So your civil rights are not as needed. So we agreed in that 504 meeting, or we agreed in that IEP meeting to this document, right? This 504 plan, this individualized education program. And that is, we have to deliver it in the conformity of it. What does that mean? That means what we agreed upon, right? So it's very important that staff members, that principals make sure that their incoming staff in the new school year understands Billy's civil rights, those accommodations in 504, and understands their civil rights of those accommodations that sit inside of their IEP. So in either one of those, I would file that my student was denied their accommodations. And we'll get to that in just a second. Okay. So the form is enter information about yourself. I'm always filing on behalf of my client. Why do I do that? Because, and we're going to have a part 2 of this about what happens after I file the civil right complaint. What can I expect? Because I want to be the person, the point person for this process all the way through. Why is that? Because parents are passionate. And sometimes when you're passionate, you're not talking about a legal violation and they can get a little bit, I don't want to say derailed, but you want to stick to the legal components that you're alleging with the federal entity, right? Because when you do get on after you file your complaint, if it's opened or considered to being open, you're talking to a federal investigator, a federal attorney, and they're very serious. And they want, just if you ever got a ticket, what do they say to you? Just the facts, ma'am. And parents and guardians want to tell the whole story, right? And sometimes that might be confusing or make it unclear for the investigator that may be able to help your child that was discriminated against. Okay. So information about yourself. That's who is ever filing. If you're filing on behalf of your child, if you're if you're the tutor and you're filing on behalf of a kiddo you tutor, then put the information about yourself, first name, last name, address, primary phone call, the usual things, your email address. Who else can we call if we cannot reach you? Do you know who I put there? No one. No one. I don't put anybody else's name. So if it's you and your spouse and you want to put a second name, you would do that. Question number 3, who was discriminated against? There's just 2 options. Yourself or someone else. Yourself or someone else. Whether I'm filing on behalf of a student that has a 504 and IEP, it's going to be someone else. And whether I'm filing on behalf of a playground that's not ADA compliant, it's still going to be someone else. Number 4, what institution discriminated? What institution discriminated? So we have SEAs, state education agencies, and then we have LEAs, local education agencies. So I'm looking for the education agency that is where my child goes to school. So that's going to be your county, your city, or your school district, depending on where you live in the United States. They're called different things. So for instance, in Florida, which I think is funny, they're all counties, but then they're school districts. So I would, if I was in Florida, I would say Mickey Mouse County, which is not a thing, and then Pluto Elementary School. Okay, so the institution is going to be the school district, the county, or the city. You would put that district information, address, city, state, zip code, and then it says the school or department involved. So then I'm going to put Elm Elementary School or Allen High School or ABC Junior High, whatever that is. I'm going to put that there next. Okay. The address is for the district. It's not for the campus where the violation occurred. The department or school involved is where your child attends currently. Number 5, have you tried to resolve the complaint through the institution's grievance process, due process, or with another agency? No, you just need to answer that question. Yes, or it doesn't throw out the case. You could have had a due process. You could have tried that. For me, I am always putting no, because if I file a civil rights complaint, I'm going to do that first. For me, that's just how I would represent my clients, because I know the window is so tiny and I'm looking for a different outcome when I file with the federal government than a state complaint. Okay. Number 6, describe the discrimination. So this is where people, I think, get a little derailed in that they literally read describe the discrimination. And so they want to give you a story. It was 1904. He was 3 years old. He started school at San Diego Elementary School in pre-K, and now 7 paragraphs later, he's in ninth grade. They won't give him assistive technology. That is not what they mean. That is not what it means. And the discrimination is one of those categories described in discrimination. And so I would say on or about June 2nd, 2023, because that's my timeline, Billy Smith was discriminated based on disability. Or I would say on or about June 2nd, 2023, Billy Smith was discriminated based on race. Billy was discriminated based on retaliation. And then I will say what occurred, right? And this is what they're asking for you. They're asking the dates, the names that was the person that was discriminated against, what happened, witnesses, if any, why you believe the discrimination was based on race, sex, disability, age, or whatever basis you indicate, okay, or retaliatory. So in that, and this is just a general version, I would put on or about June 2nd, Billy Smith was discriminated based on disability and retaliation. The local education agency discriminated against the student by denying him his accommodations, by failure to implement his special education and related services, by denying him access to his voice output communication device. And we're not going to go into really what OCR you can file on and what you can't file on. Most things inside of an IEP, this is very general, are going to be under a state complaint. I can tell you some for sure's. OCR is not going to open a complaint about an evaluation. OCR is not going to open a complaint about placement. OCR is not going to open a complaint about child fine. Those are all state issues, but they will open issues as it relates to were services received. We call that, did you implement the IEP? Did you implement the 504 plan? And to implement that, certain providers have to provide their services. So I may have filed on Billy Smith was denied his accommodations, Billy Smith was discriminated against, and the LEA, there was a failure to implement as he was denied his special education and related service minutes. And then I would put in there 300.156, the requirements for a special educator. And so that's a little more complicated. I won't go into all of that, but they will always look at opening a complaint when there is a violation of their civil rights, which is going to be an accommodation. And if you're considering there was a violation of failure to implement the IEP as it relates to services. So I'm not going to file an OCR and say, I didn't like his math goal. There's no need for that. I didn't like his present levels. I didn't like the teacher. There's no need to file on that. And those are very general information, but those are the types of filings that I would do. If I would file on race, I would give them some information based upon why I believe that occurred. If there's retaliation, which happens a lot on my filings, I find that schools sometimes behave worse when parents invoke their legal rights. It's unfortunate, but if that is also occurring in tandem, I'm going to additionally file on retaliation. And we would put that information in there. I don't say, he didn't go to PT 12 times. I just say during this school year, during the 2023-2024 school year, he was denied his special education and related services. And then that's going to give them, in my experience, enough information to consider whether or not they're going to open it. And then it says, do you have written information? Next, do you have written information that you think will help us understand your complaint? Your answer needs to be yes. Otherwise, there's not really any point in filing a complaint. All things that are settled legally are based on documentation. And your allegation will be thrown out because the school has documentation. I hope the school does have documentation. If you're going to file, you need to have documentation. You will be contacted with instructions for submitting the documentation. Please do not send original documents. And you're welcome to send the documents at that time. It's my practice that I wait for them to ask for the documents that they want. You enter the date that the last date of discrimination occurred. So today is a weekday. I would put November 29th, 2023. Are you requesting a waiver of the 180-day filing? I always put no. What would you like the institution to do as a result of your complaint? So here's what's really important. Whether I'm filing mediation, a due process hearing, a state written complaint, or Office of Civil Rights complaint, they always want you to tell them what is the resolution you're seeking. And one of the things I train on is sometimes parents don't know They don't know what their resolution options are. But for generality, remember that resolution is a benefit to the student with a disability. What would benefit the student with a disability? And so while my settlements are more robust and end up being more detailed, these are the two main things that I put in there when it says, what is the remedy that you're seeking? Number one, no matter where I file a complaint, I want the district and the campus to be trained on their duties, responsibilities, and obligations under ADA, Title II, and OCR. ADA, Title II, and OCR. Why did I not say IDEA? Because OCR doesn't cover IDEA. I know it feels a little confusing, but they don't cover that. Okay, they cover civil rights. Because I do want the school district trained. It's not about me winning. I believe that school districts could do a better job if they were actually provided training. And I know that they're not. I just know from the thousands of people that I've had the opportunity to serve and the hundreds of emails that we get every month from amazing school-based members. They want the training, but it doesn't occur, right? We shove teachers into back to school and I guess it's the last day you can wear jeans. And then we shove all these papers out of them and go get them, right? And don't forget your why. So I want my primacy is for schools to be trained. If schools were properly trained, there would be a lot less need for anybody filing a complaint about anything. And then number two, I'm going to ask for, in a very general way, I'm going to ask for compensatory time to the student that was discriminated against. And I literally say that compensatory time for Billy Smith, who was discriminated against. What that ends up being could be a myriad of things. I've had settlements that were for 6 years, and I won't give you the details here. The great thing about OCR is it's not sealed. It's not like mediation. It's not closed. When you get to the settlement process over the years and doing this for a while, I've had some really good outcomes for kids with disabilities. And that's a lot of information. It's a lot of words, but that's the generality of how you file an OCR complaint. And then we're going to hit send, right? And within 20 days, we're going to send that signed consent from the parent, make sure that it gets in. And then in our next training, we'll talk about what happens next after I've filed my OCR complaint and I have my first interview with the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. Hit subscribe, share this with a friend, and you know what? Meet me back here every single week. We're not just talking about change, we're making it. Because when you know better, you do better. And when we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody.